We have with us tonight Dahr Jamail, and Dahr is world-renowned journalist and author. He's the author of Beyond the Green Zone, which is his reporting from Iraq during the first phase of Iraq War #2 as an unembedded reporter. You know, we got to see lots of footage on TV with guys all dressed up, you know, in full gear and so on, riding along in MRAPs and strikers and so on. But that wasn't Dahr. Dahr was out there meeting people and getting the story that the military wasn't necessarily putting out. So, and then his second book, The Will to Resist, tells the story of military resistors in our time. That's where Josh comes into play. You know, it's just outstanding a read. So I highly recommend it. Those books will be on sale, along with David Courtwright's classic, Soldiers in Revolt, sort of the handbook of Vietnam-era military resistance, and a new book by Rory Fanning, which is about his walk across America to raise money for the Pat Tillman Foundation. And it's a journey of self-discovery, and I think you'll find that a very good read as well. So, Dahr has also been a reporter for Al-Jazeera, a correspondent for Al-Jazeera. In fact, you were living in Qatar, right, for the last couple of years before he moved to Port Townsend. And he also writes columns for a variety of publications, including Nation and Truthout, and let's see, I have them written down here: Interpress Service, Tom Dispatch, The Guardian, a variety of publications. And he's been the recipient of awards such as the 2008 Martha Gellhorn Award for Journalism, the Lannan Foundation Writing Residency Fellowship, the James Aronson Award for Social Justice Journalism, and the Joe A. Calloway Award for Civic Courage. Without further ado.
Thanks everyone very much for coming out tonight, and I think mostly for being here for Coffee Strong, because that's what this is all about. And I'm going to talk about two things that are deeply related. First, about the military and GI resistance, and then climate change. And then I guess we'll probably be some time for some questions and discussions after that. I'm going to start with talking about a guy that I imagine most people in this room are already very, very familiar with, Thomas Young from Seattle, who was a friend of, I know, several of the vets here, including Josh. He passed away at 34 years of age at his home in Seattle just last month, right before Veterans Day, interestingly. Thomas joined the Army when he was 22 on September 13th, 2001. He'd been in Iraq less than 1 week when he and fellow soldiers came under sniper fire on April 4th, 2004, while riding in an unarmored truck in Baghdad. He was paralyzed from the chest down after being hit by a bullet in his spine. I'm going to read the brunt of his last letter. Again, some of you might be familiar with this, but I feel like this really is an important thing for those of you who haven't heard it, because it perfectly summarizes, I think, the plight of people in the military serving today. And he wrote it, subtitled, the title of it is The Last Letter, a message to George W. Bush and Dick Cheney from a dying veteran. But I would add that it could easily, I think, could have added Barack Obama's name onto that as well. He wrote, "I write this letter on the 10th anniversary of the Iraq War on behalf of my fellow Iraq War veterans. I write this letter on behalf of the 4,488 soldiers and Marines who died in Iraq. I write this letter on behalf of the hundreds of thousands of veterans who have been wounded, and on behalf of those whose wounds, physical and psychological, have destroyed their lives. I am one of those gravely wounded. My life is coming to an end. I am living under hospice care. I write this letter on behalf of husbands and wives who have lost spouses, on behalf of children who have lost a parent, on behalf of fathers and mothers who have lost sons and daughters, and on behalf of those who care for the many thousands of my fellow veterans who have brain injuries. I write this letter on behalf of those veterans whose trauma and self-revulsion for what they have witnessed, endured, and done in Iraq have led to suicide, and on behalf of the active duty soldiers and Marines who commit, on average, a suicide a day. I write this letter on behalf of some 1 million Iraqi dead, and on behalf of the countless Iraqi wounded. I write this letter on behalf of us all, the human detritus your war has left behind, those who will spend their lives in unending pain and grief. I write this letter, my last letter, to you, Mr. Bush and Mr. Cheney. I write not because I think you grasp the terrible human and moral consequences of your lies, manipulation, and thirst for wealth and power. I write this letter because, before my own death, I want to make it clear that I, and hundreds of thousands of my fellow veterans, along with millions of my fellow citizens, along with hundreds of millions more in Iraq and the Middle East, know fully who you are and what you have done. You may evade justice, but in our eyes you are each guilty of egregious war crimes, of plunder, and finally of murder, including the murder of thousands of young Americans, my fellow veterans, whose future you stole. Your positions of authority, your millions of dollars of personal wealth, your public relations consultants, your privilege and your power cannot mask the hollowness of your character. You send us to fight and die in Iraq after you, Mr. Cheney, dodged the draft in Vietnam, and you, Mr. Bush, went AWOL from your National Guard unit. Your cowardice and selfishness were established decades ago. You were not willing to risk yourselves for our nation, but you sent hundreds of thousands of young men and women to be sacrificed in a senseless war with no more thought than it takes to put out the garbage. I joined the Army 2 days after the 9/11 attacks. I joined the Army because our country had been attacked. I wanted to strike back at those who killed some 3,000 of my fellow citizens. I did not join the Army to go to Iraq, a country that had no part in the September 2001 attacks and did not pose a threat to its neighbors, much less the U.S. I did not join the Army to, quote, liberate Iraqis, or to shut down mythical weapons of mass destruction facilities, or to implant what you cynically call democracy in Baghdad and the Middle East. I did not join the Army to rebuild Iraq, which at the time you told us could be paid for by Iraq's oil revenues. Instead, this war has cost the U.S. over $3 trillion. I especially did not join the Army to carry out preemptive war. Preemptive war is illegal under international law. And as a soldier in Iraq I now know, abetting your idiocy and your crimes. The Iraq War installed a corrupt and brutal pro-Iranian government in Baghdad, one cemented in power through the use of torture, death squads, and terror. And it has left Iran as the dominant force in the region. On every level, moral, strategic, military, and economic, Iraq was a failure. And it was you, Mr. Bush and Mr. Cheney, who started this war, and it is you who should pay the consequences. I have, like many other disabled veterans, suffered from the inadequate and often inept care provided by the VA. I have, like many other disabled veterans, come to realize that our mental and physical wounds are of no interest to you, perhaps of no interest to any politician. We were used, we were betrayed, and we have been abandoned. The tragic story of Thomas Young is only one example, one that was well documented in the media, and one that we have seen and felt, but it is only one story. Think about this story, his story, in the context of the fact that an estimated 22 veterans, of the estimated 22 veterans who each day kill themselves. This renders a total in 1 year far above the number of soldiers who died in combat in total during both the invasions and occupations of Iraq and Afghanistan. Now, in the context of Thomas Young's story, and the fact that an estimated 8,000 veterans commit suicide annually, Let's talk about resistance. At Fort Hood in Central Texas, Army Specialist Victor Augusto refused to deploy to Afghanistan. His response to a punitive Army memo that rebuked his action was to write on it, quote, "There is no way I will deploy to Afghanistan. The occupation is immoral and unjust. It does not make the American people any safer. It has the opposite effect." On the same day, when he refused to obey a direct order to prepare to deploy from his company commander, he declared, quote, "I will not obey any orders I deem to be immoral or illegal. I am not willing to participate in this occupation, knowing it is completely wrong. It's a matter of what I'm willing to live with." I asked him if he was willing to take the consequences that the military was sure to mete out. He replied, "Yes, I'm fully prepared for this. I have concluded that the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan are not going to be ended by politicians or people at the top. They are not responsive to the people. They are responsive to corporate America. The only way to make them responsive to the needs of the people is for soldiers to not fight their wars. If soldiers won't fight their wars, the wars won't happen. I hope I'm setting an example for other soldiers." Tens of thousands of soldiers from both Iraq and Afghanistan have gone AWOL, absent without leave. Untold thousands continue to do so even now every year. Again, in the context of Thomas Young, think about the lack of health care for veterans that was promised from the VA and how clear it is today as to why these resource wars, these imperial wars occurred. These soldiers are not walking away from the military, but walking towards justice. A little bit more about resistance. Speaking of Josh Simpson, when soldiers bear direct witness to the effects of a failed policy, it becomes difficult to maintain troop morale and subsequently to contain acts of dissent. Former Sergeant Josh Simpson, who served as a counterintelligence agent in Iraq, confirmed several instances of fabricated vehicular movement. I'd written about this in the book, basically calling the patrol, instead of search and destroy missions, they called them search and avoid missions. And detailed it out in the book, where they basically found ways to, I spoke with several soldiers who found ways to manipulate the computers in their Humvees when they were on patrol to make it look like the patrol was moving around where it was supposed to go, but they would sit and park the patrols in villages and play soccer games with kids or drink tea in the shade or that kind of thing. And Josh had also was familiar with that too. He said, quote, "I knew soldiers who learned to simulate vehicular movement on the computer screen to create the impression of being on patrol. In the headquarters where I worked, we would see the whole vehicles going on patrol where no vehicles were being moved except on a computer screen in some striker vehicle somewhere." He also told me, "It doesn't make any sense. You realize that the whole system is flawed, and if that is flawed, then obviously the whole war is flawed. If the basic premise of the war is flawed, definitely the intelligence system that is supposed to lead us to victory is flawed. What that implies is that victory is not even a possibility." He continued, "I thought to myself, I can't do this anymore. First of all, it's bad for me mentally because I know I'm doing something that I loathe. Second, I'm participating in an organization that I wish to resist in every way I can. So while on leave, I just stopped showing up for drill, didn't call my unit, didn't give them any reason for it. I changed my phone number and they did not have my address. I don't know if technically I'm still in the reserves. I don't know what my situation is, but I don't really care either. If I go to jail, I go to jail. I'd rather go to jail than go to Iraq." I want to talk about sexual assault in the military and resistance to it. I wrote about this back in 2007, 2008, 2009, but if you turn on the news just about still, even every other week, there's something coming out about rampant sexual assault epidemics within military academies and within the military itself. And it's amazing to me writing about these shocking statistics then when I published my second book, but that the situation has not only continued but worsened even now. One person I wrote about in the book, Catherine Jane West of the Mississippi National Guard, she was raped by a fellow soldier, Kevin Lemieux, at the sprawling Camp Anaconda north of Baghdad. In court, the defense lawyer for Lemieux merely wanted to know why her defense lawyer, no, I'm sorry, it was Lemieux's lawyer, merely wanted to know why, as a member of the Army, she had not fought back. She said, "He caught me and put his mouth over my mouth and told me not to scream. If I screamed, he said he would kill me and then have his friend come over and finish me off. He put me on my stomach, tied my hands behind my back, rolled me over, and proceeded to take my clothes off. I can still tell you exactly what he smelled like. I can see images of his face. I just lay there and cried. I couldn't say anything." The morning after she was raped, West saw an Army doctor who gave her a thorough examination and took semen and hair samples. The Army's criminal investigation team concluded her story of the incident to be true. Moreover, her rapist bragged about the incident to his buddies in his unit, and they turned him in. It seemed like a closed case. The accused was based in Fort Wainwright, Fairbanks, Alaska, so West had to fly there for the trial. In addition, her commanding officer and first sergeant told the court that she was a promiscuous female because she was caught on base buying things to send home. In contrast, her rapist, after the third court hearing of his trial, was promoted by the military to a specialist. Meanwhile, his lawyer entered a plea of insanity. He was later found guilty of kidnapping but not rape. Despite his own admission of the crime, the military covered him. He was given 3 years for kidnapping, half of which the sentence was knocked off. Ultimately, he was dishonorably discharged. That's one example. Some statistics for context. In 1995, the Archives of Family Medicine revealed in a study that 90% of women veterans from the 1991 U.S. attack on Iraq and from earlier wars had been sexually harassed. In 2004, the Journal of Military Medicine published a study of veterans from Vietnam and all wars since, according to which 71% of women soldiers have been sexually assaulted or raped while serving. The Department of Defense admits that it only counts reported rapes and that 90% of the rapes in the military go unreported. So again, think about those shocking statistics in the context that 90% of the rapes go unreported. Among the reported cases, nearly half are dismissed for lack of adequate proof or due to the death of the victim. Less than 11% of the cases result in a court-martial. Since 2002, nearly 75,000 female veterans have reported being raped, sexually assaulted, or subjected to other forms of sexual trauma. And how has the military responded to this? By way of example, the Department of Defense report on sexual assault in the military for fiscal year 2007 states there were 2,688 total reports of sexual assault involving military service members. The military services completed a total of 1,955 criminal investigations on the reports made during or prior to that year. These criminal investigations resulted in the shockingly low number of 181 courts-martial. So out of 2,688 total reported cases, 181 of those went to court-martial. Pentagon spokesperson Cynthia Smith assured me that the Department of Defense is aware of the crisis and then went on to offer a novel solution. Quote, "We understand that this is very important for everyone to get involved in preventing sexual assault and are calling on everyone to get involved, step in, and watch each other's backs." So that was their solution. You here at Coffee Strong, many of you who are these stories I've shared tonight are the front lines of military resistance. Whether it's helping military members get their VA benefits that they are owed and desperate for, educating military personnel about their rights, or helping people who choose to walk away from the military altogether, you've been on the front lines doing your work for 6 years and are still going strong. As someone who has seen firsthand what happens to people like Thomas Young when they go to places like Iraq, I want to take this opportunity to thank all of you and to urge you to continue on with your work and to strongly urge others who are here and even those who aren't here to support you in every way possible. And I want to close this part of my talk about GI resistance with a quote from the Tao Te Ching. "Weapons are the tools of fear. A decent man will avoid them except in the direst necessity, and if compelled, will use them only with the utmost restraint. Peace is the highest value. If the peace has been shattered, how can he be content? His enemies are not demons, but human beings like himself. He doesn't wish them personal harm, nor does he rejoice in victory. How could he rejoice in victory and delight in the slaughter of men? Now, when I was thinking about what else to talk about tonight, I was trying to figure out a way to draw a link between what I just shared and climate change. And so I was speaking with my wife, and she said, you know, that's not going to be a problem. We're going to talk about the military and climate change. We can start with things like the military is the single largest consumer of fossil fuels on the planet, ergo the biggest polluter on the planet, and the fact that Iraq, Afghanistan, and other 98% of the other places where the military is involved around the planet, they're all resource wars. And at this stage of the game, when we talk about climate change, not just for oil and gas, but we talk about water and food and land to grow food, every war is a resource war, now more than ever, and increasingly so as we go into the future. In the last few years, the brunt of my reporting is focused on climate change, and I've been writing a lot of articles about it and giving more and more talks about it, so I didn't want to pass up this opportunity to give a brief talk about basically my current assessment of the situation. And it's not my current assessment, it's based on the most recent and updated reports that we have right now. 200 species are going extinct every single day, and this has been the case for years now. We're likely to begin seeing periods of ice-free Arctic by as soon as this coming summer, or the summer of 2016 if you believe the US Navy study. The 14 hottest years on record have all occurred in the last 16. August, September, and October were each the hottest months ever recorded, respectively, and this year is on pace to be the hottest year ever recorded. All this, and we are only at 0.85 C degrees above pre-industrial baseline levels of CO2. Coal will overtake oil as the dominant energy source by 2017, and without a major shift away from coal, average global temperatures could rise by 6 degrees C by 2050, leading to devastating climate change. This is dramatically faster than even the worst-case Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change prediction, which has us at around a 6C increase at worst by 2100. Please bear in mind that humans have never lived on a planet at 3.5 C or higher, and these dramatically abrupt and intense temperature changes we are causing mean that we lose our ability to feed ourselves, as crops cannot keep up with this kind of change. And there is absolutely nothing tangible in the political or corporate world to indicate that there will be a major shift away from coal, or that we will surrender our addiction to fossil fuels. In fact, the use of both is only increasing, and so are CO2 emissions right along with it. In the wake of recent news of global emissions rising 2.3% in 2013 to set yet another record, and marking the largest year-to-year increase in 30 years, the IPCC announced that the world isn't moving anywhere near fast enough to have a chance at mitigating the impacts of climate disruption in any real way. The Endangered Species Coalition recently released a list of things people should take their children to go see outdoors, because if they wait too long, their kids might not get a chance to see them before they become extinct. The list includes monarch butterflies, polar bears, great white sharks, white-barked pine trees, and the Snake River sockeye salmon. All this, and we are only at 0.85 C above pre-industrial baseline levels of CO2. To provide perspective on how far along we are regarding runaway climate disruption, another recent study shows that the planet's wildlife population is less than half the size it was 4 decades ago. More than half of the vertebrate population on the planet has been annihilated in just 4 decades. Let that sink in for a moment. For perspective, once CO2 is emitted into the atmosphere, a new study shows it takes 10 years for its full impacts to be felt. Then it lingers for up to another 100 plus years. Hence, everything that we're seeing now is a result of emissions only up until 2004. Since 2004, we've emitted, each successive year, we've emitted progressively more CO2 than the previous year, every year being a new record. Lastly, and things I'd like to mention regarding where we are regarding climate disruption, the recently released 2014 Climate and Energy Outlook report by MIT tells us that global energy use and carbon dioxide emissions will likely double by 2100. And at this point, I found through my reporting that it makes more sense to talk about how to deal emotionally with these facts as it does to just load more and more facts on you, which I could do, but I think just what I shared is enough to give people the idea of really where we are. And I've had to look at this myself personally from reporting on this stuff and struggling with depression. So I want to talk about that part of this story. There are 5 stages of normal grief that were first proposed by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross in her book On Death and Dying. The stages of mourning and grief are universal and experienced by people from all walks of life. Mourning occurs in response to an individual's own terminal illness, the loss of a close relationship, to the death of a valued being, human or animal, or the loss of a planet and everything and everyone we know. Stage 1, denial and isolation. The first reaction to learning of terminal illness or death of a cherished loved one or planet is to deny the reality of the situation. It is a normal reaction to rationalize overwhelming emotions. It is a defense mechanism that buffers the immediate shock. We block out the words and hide from the facts. This is a temporary response that carries us through the first wave of pain. Examples of this abound, but one is how the famed Northwest Passage is now being exploited by luxury cruise companies. Given the ongoing melting of the Arctic ice cap, a company recently announced a 900-mile, 32-day luxury cruise there with fares starting at $20,000, so people can luxuriate while viewing the demise of the planetary ecosystem. Stage 2, anger. As the masking effects of denial and isolation begin to wear, reality and its pain reemerge. We are not ready. The intense emotion is deflected from our vulnerable core, redirected and expressed instead as anger. The anger may be aimed at inanimate objects, complete strangers, friends, or family. An example of this would be the constant stream of vitriol from the far-right mainstream media who lash out at climate disruption scientists, even making death threats. Stage 3, bargaining. The normal reaction to feelings of helplessness and vulnerability is often a need to regain control. Examples of this abound, especially right now. Maybe Obama will veto the Keystone XL pipeline legislation when it finally does pass the Senate vote. Maybe if Hillary Clinton is the next president, she will enact better legislation that will mitigate global climate disruption. Mainstream journalists like Bill McKibben and Naomi Klein, who continue to lead people to believe that the government can be petitioned and changed, and this will save us. All these are examples of bargaining. Stage 4, depression. The main type of depression associated with mourning is a reaction to practical implications relating to the loss. Sadness and regret predominate this type of depression. We worry about all the species going extinct. We worry about younger generations and how they will or won't survive. An example of this stage comes from Professor Camille Parmesan, a climate disruption researcher who is now blaming her depression on her findings. Quote, "I don't know of a single scientist that's not having an emotional reaction to what is being lost," she said in the National Wildlife Federation's 2012 report. Quote, "It's gotten to be so depressing that I'm not sure I'm going to go back to this particular site again," she said in reference to an ocean reef she had studied since 2002. Quote, "Because I just know I'm going to see more and more of the coral dead and bleached and covered with brown algae." Stage 5, acceptance. Reaching this stage of mourning is a gift not afforded to everyone. This phase is marked by withdrawal and calm. It is this stage I hope to spend most of my time in. Frankly, I am bouncing in and out of it now, from acceptance to depression to rage and back again. We don't know how long we have, 5 years, 15 years, 30, beyond the year 2100. But when we allow our hearts to be shattered and broken completely open by these stark, cold realities, we allow ourselves to have the perspective blown open to vistas we've never known before. Like reaching new heights on a mountain, we can see things we've never seen before. Our thinking, attitudes, and outlook on life changes dramatically. It's a new consciousness. Perhaps there we can live this time with grace, dignity, and caring. Perhaps there we can find ways to save a few more species while we share this precious time with loved ones in the wild places we love so much in this rare and precious world. Thanks, everyone.
You mentioned several times about Iraq being a resource war, and I believe in your introduction it was also expressed that you had been in the area around Syria. So I wonder if you could speak to what is happening throughout that area, and then if you have any information even up into the Ukraine, Crimea and the Ukraine.
Well, starting with Iraq, I mean, I think a lot of people think, well, it was all about the oil, but look at the situation now, and there are direct U.S. companies in there involved, and that's actually only partly true. Kurdish Iraq is already in full swing, working with Western oil companies. I don't know if you saw a ways back, there was a big tanker of Kurdish oil that offloaded down in Houston. So there's definitely Western oil companies working directly with in Kurdistan and buying Kurdish oil. So that's happening in the south. There's a little bit of Western oil. And when I say Western oil companies, I include, you know, Exxon, Chevron, Total, etc., that are in place in southern Iraq and aren't doing as much work down there because of the security situation, lack thereof, but they're there. And then what's also happened, I think, that's important to note is that the U.S. backed Maliki, the previous prime minister, because he was willing to leave the door open legislatively for Western oil company. He didn't nationalize Iraq's oil. That was the whole thing. The first thing the U.S. did when they invaded was they denationalized the oil. And Maliki, he basically kept that door open so that if and when the security situation mellows out, that Western oil companies would be able to do business in Iraq. And of course, Maliki's now gone. He was replaced by Abdi, who was one of his ministers who's from the same Dawa party. He's basically just, he's the political replacement of Maliki, but nothing else has changed. You know, we still have death squad operation, we still have the strong ties with Iran and all of that. But point being is that Iraq's oil is still, it's just a matter of time for the stuff in the south, which is where the brunt of the oil is, where that starts getting used up by, or accessed more directly by Western oil companies. And so the thing with ISIS, with what's going on, is that I won't go into too many details unless someone wants me to, but suffice it to say that this is obviously, it's the legacy of the Iraq occupation by the U.S., because they're basically what's left over of the primarily Sunni resistance that fought against the U.S. occupation forces there. Now actually in Iraq form the military backbone of ISIS. So you've got the radical fundamentalists that started the group in Syria and came down into Iraq and basically joined forces with a persecuted Sunni minority there who'd been persecuted by the Maliki regime through his whole tenure. And they basically joined forces with ISIS and said, look, we'd rather fight with you guys than have Maliki's forces, i.e. the Iraqi government forces, coming into our cities and detaining people, killing people, raping people, hauling them off into these secret dungeons and horrible things happening. That was going on from day one of Maliki being in power up until when he left, and it's still going on to a certain degree. And then so enter ISIS, and all of a sudden all that stops. And so, of course, these folks joined forces with ISIS. And so you've got former Iraqi battle-hardened generals that are basically making strategy for them, and that's why they've been so effective militarily. But just to give you an understanding that, you know, all that happened, as you can clearly see, only because of the U.S. occupation and what it did to the Sunni minority, and that they were basically, you know, Saddam was pushed out and basically replaced with a Shia Saddam. And so, you know, trade one for the other, and then this is the aftermath of that. And then Ukraine, I haven't written about Ukraine directly, but you know, in short, the broad brushstrokes are that it's all about trying to freeze Russia out of the European gas market. There was a Russian-leaning prime minister in there before, but it's well documented that this so-called democratic overthrow of the previous prime minister was orchestrated by USAID, and interestingly enough, Pierre Omidyar, the guy who funds First Look Media, where Glenn Greenwald works now. Actually, it's documented he gave $500 million along with USAID money to help foment this democratic revolution in Ukraine to kick the whole thing off. So it's a faux revolution. It's all about freezing Russia out of the gas market in the EU. It's impacted Russia, but then we see what's happened on the ground is bit by bit Russia's just slowly taken over the Ukraine again and reabsorbing it back into Russia. And meanwhile signing you know, $1-trillion gas deals with China that are going to go on for the next 30 years. So the plans backfired a little bit on the U.S.
So we thought you might say something on the Olympic Peninsula about electromagnetic bases and stations and its impact on life and life forms perhaps, and you could touch base on that?
Yeah. But I will. I just wrote a way too long of an article about that. Basically the plan is the Navy is pushing to get permits and push through all the bureaucracy that they need to in order for them to conduct electromagnetic warfare training on the Western Olympic Peninsula. And so what that means is they would take these, they call them Growler jets. They're electromagnetic warfare jets. They're stationed on Whidbey Island, which is basically off the northeast coast of the Olympic Peninsula. And they would fly from there out the Strait of Juan de Fuca, and then on the western side of the Olympic Peninsula, which it's almost all, either Olympic National Forest, Olympic National Park, or native reservation lands. And they're basically pushing it where they would have these 15 mobile emitter towers. They say that there are these trucks the size of an RV that have these tall towers emitting signals that then the planes pick up. The Navy claims that they wouldn't be actually using the jets to do any radar jamming. If they do, that's enough radiation to, I listed it in my article, numerous scientific studies showing direct human health impact. There's even an Air Force study that talks about definitive human health impact that I cited, and others. And I'm going to write a lot more about the human impact. From the jets, the Navy, they had a little Navy dog and pony show up at Port Townsend Wednesday that we went to, and they claim that the jets won't be doing any jamming. But even the radar towers, even if that's true, which I don't trust it, but even if it were true, even the radar towers themselves, there's loads and loads of studies that show that they cause cancer and other human health impacts. And I'm actually interviewing a doctor about that and have a story that will come out probably 1 week from this Monday on that, an update. The other thing too, we talk about the wildlife impact. There's 1 billion birds that use that flight corridor for migration. It's extremely well documented that the flying jets, the noise of the jets, and all the EMF radiation, EMR radiation would impact literally their bionavigation. And so there's that. And not even talk about the wildlife on the ground. And the Navy's responsible. What about, because a report came out that showed if someone or something was near one of their emitting towers in their like mobile vans. For 15 minutes is enough time for it to literally melt a human eyeball, like liquefy all the tissue of your eyeball. And so someone brought this up at one of the meetings, and they said, well, we'll watch for large animals, and if there's a large animal comes through, we'll turn it off. So this kind of nonsense.
About 19 miles from the...
The good news is that apparently the Army had started the process to try to acquire permits needed to do their own types of training exercises out in that area. And when they saw the storm that started from the Navy's try, they withdrew their permit applications. They said, "Oh, we'll do something." And then there's going to be at least thus far that I know of 2 major lawsuits filed against the Navy to stop them from doing it. So, and I think the momentum's still just kind of getting going. Like it's really like, yeah, there's a lot of very well-informed people up in Port Townsend and well-connected people that are working, and we're still kind of getting that going. And I'll have another article come out on it. But the next public comment period ends January 9th. But there's definitely there's some pretty major groups involved in these lawsuits. So there's I don't know if we'll win or not, but definitely there's some pretty good pushback happening. But
where can we see your articles?
I write exclusively for Truthout now, and then I repost everything on my own website. So, but that article, yeah, that was just published a few weeks ago. Thanks for asking that question. Sultan.
Yeah, I'm kind of wondering if kids in the Forks High School know if their cell phones are being disrupted by this. But anyway, I wanted to go back to Iraq War 3 or Syria War 1 or whatever it is we're calling it. And kind of ask you about, because a lot of your work in the military has been about personnel in the military, and kind of combined with what you were just saying, war is obviously moving in a more technological direction. And I think the lack of an outcry about this war is not just because it's Obama, but because there are no American casualties like Kosovo or Libya. And I guess with the drone warfare, with this kind of air war kind of message, what you feel the anti-war movement should be doing as a response, shifting our message when there aren't necessarily American casualties. And also wondering if the drone war is a response to GI resistance, because robots don't go AWOL, don't search and avoid, and if, in a sense that's a measure of their concern about GI resistance in the future.
Yeah, I'll take the back end first. I mean, definitely when I was working on the GI resistance book back in 07, 08, it became clear that because of resistance that was happening, and the worst thing that can happen to an administration during the war is soldiers being killed and wounded. And so enough hell was being raised in the wake. By the time Bush left office, I mean, the war was, IVAW was exploding, and the anti-war movement was pretty big and pretty loud. And even before the 2008 election rolled around, there was a big push in the military. And I've seen the documents too. It's like, look, if there was an intentional decision made, if we start replacing humans with drones, and that's going to take the casualties way down. And then a conscious decision to stop trying to deploy people, and a bigger push into on-the-ground death squads and this kind of thing. And that's why we saw a huge uptick in that in Iraq in 06, 07, and 08 was, we'll train, we'll bring in the John Negropontes and the James Steeles, and we'll train up all these death squads and send these guys out to do our dirty work, and then we can start pulling our soldiers out. So I think it was those two things. And then of course when Santo Obama got elected, and the whole what was left of the anti-war movement just collapsed, and IVAW lost a ton of members, and there were some other problems like that. What can be done now about, there's just, to me, there's so many issues, huge, massive issues that we're overwhelmed with. And for me, I can just talk about what I do, and it's just take one topic that I think is the most important thing to me and focus in on that, whether it's climate change stuff or, you know, helping one person get out of the military is a huge thing. And because if I focus on the bigger picture, I'm just immediately completely overwhelmed, whatever the topic is. But the thing is, like, that I like about Coffee Strong is that if you take, it's that old story about, you know, I think most people have heard it, of the girl on the beach, you know, tide goes out and she's picking up starfish and throwing them back in the water, and some old guy walks up and says, what are you doing? There's thousands and unlimited starfish here. You're throwing them back. It's not going to make any difference. And she throws one in the water and she said, it will to that one. You know, and I think that's what we can do. You know, in a place like this, if it helps one person get their benefits so we don't have another Thomas, or if it stops one more woman from joining the military so she doesn't get raped, or if it stops one other person from joining the military and they don't get sent overseas and kill somebody. I mean, just that one thing. I mean, if you do work that stops one person from joining the military or helps one person get out, I mean, you've literally changed someone's life and everyone around them, their life, you know. And I think that's a realistic perspective, as opposed to, you know, if we look at, you know, there kind of isn't an anti-war movement right now. You know, maybe if Romney or Jeb Bush is the next president, then maybe it'll kick back up, you know, but that's probably not going to happen. It's probably going to be Hillary. So then what happens is there's still not an anti-war movement or whatever, and all that stuff's just overwhelming and frustrating, and so I just have to keep it, you know, right now my thing is climate change, and, you know, that's, you know, no small topic, but there's so much stuff to do. It's just like throw a dart and pick a topic and you're going to be able to be of use and make a difference. And then, of course, you know, for me, it's like, it's what keeps me sane, because to not do nothing is, I think, the absolute surefire way to fall into depression and, you know, start some bad habits or something. Yeah.
I like the way that you're tying all of the individual oppressions and fights that humanity has against the structure together. I was wondering if you were familiar with the study done by Eileen Zubergen, if I'm saying that right, called Rape, War, and Hegemonic Masculinity, where she cites a number of other researchers of personality and aggression and masculinity, and draws a undeniable connection between the fact that we will never eradicate rape without eradicating war and the tendency to direct our masculine members of humanity toward an aggressive personality.
I haven't seen that specific study, but I think, I mean, I'm glad you brought that up. I think that's an absolutely huge and critical topic of how all this stuff is, you know, the same system that is burning up the planet is the same system that's sending police out to kill black people, is the same system that's causing 9 out of 10 females in the military to be raped or sexually assaulted. I mean, it's the same system that is, I mean, is why our economic system is the way it is. I mean, it's all the same system. And so I think if we just pick, again, one sector of that to focus on, you know, with writing or activism or whatever it is that everybody does, you're all targeting the same thing.
It's just a really good peer-reviewed resource to support a lot of what you've been talking about, I think.
All right, thanks. Okay.
Are we absolutely certain, based on what I've been hearing of the discussion, that there actually isn't, or there actually is an anti-war movement or peace movement, but at this point it's taking a somewhat different form than in the past, because of the things we've been talking about, such as the drones and the AI and robotics and this sort of thing, where they are getting scared and diverting it into these channels? is not the resistance against the police brutality throughout the nation a form of peace movement? And is not the resistance against the electromagnetic weapons, quote, testing, and I'm putting that in very big quotes, because it's not testing, they know what it does. That's a form of resistance against electromagnetic weapons in the cities, and Mr. Jamail, I'm giving you a packet on that that's linking a couple issues, so I'm just red flagging that right now. But in any case, to me, all this is a form of anti-war or a peace movement, but it's in different forms, and recognizing that this is a war against the people throughout the planet. And once we make that recognition, we're in a much better position to actually do something at a fundamental level, rather than just dealing with a war over here or war over there, hither and yon, and not seeing that it's being brought home to us right now.
Bravo.
Yeah.
I just want to ask one question. I want to get back to this resource wars angle. And, you know, you're talking about the war in Ukraine being about, you know, keeping the Soviet Union out of the, EU gas market, right? And so there's all these resource wars that we're fighting here when, you know, Obama himself, you know, got the study from NASA that said that the West Antarctic ice sheet is falling off, which basically means that sea level rise is basically can't be stopped now. We're past the tipping point, you know, where major cities are going to be inundated, right? So, you know, he knows, at least on one level or another, that we have to change to alternate forms of energy and you know, but the oil is a big geostrategic thing, right? Who controls the oil? So who are we really up against here, you know, if we want to save our species? And, you know, what's it going to take, do you think?
That's kind of a big question.
Sorry.
I think we talked about it earlier. It's all the same system, you know, and even talking about Obama is just a waste of time. I mean, whoever the president is irrelevant. I mean,
Thank you.
It's you know, Republican, Democrat, whatever. It literally doesn't even matter at this stage of the game when we talk about climate change and resource wars. I mean, they're all going to be pushed forward no matter who's president. It's just irrelevant. And so, yeah, I just think that it's basically up to us and working on a local level, you know, and that's another thing that I think has kept me sane, frankly, of just, okay, you know, I live up on the Olympic Peninsula now, and I don't want jets flying over Olympic National Park, and I don't want that happening, so I'm going to take that fight on directly and keep writing about it until something changes. And I think each one of us just needs to draw a red line of where it is around we live, that because the stuff is coming home to us everywhere. There's no place safe. I mean, my wife and I moved to Port Townsend. I mean, we weren't under any illusions there wasn't going to be battles, but you know, it's real clear moving up there, like there's a couple of real big ones that we need to take up between the Navy's plans and the oil and gas and coal terminals and all this stuff. I mean, and us right here in this area with the fort and with the ports and everything, I mean, we have plenty of stuff that we can take on, absolutely. And I mean, Zoltan back here, if anyone doesn't know him, is a key member in doing a lot of organizing for this kind of stuff too. So. I know I've completely evaded your question, kind of intentionally.
I would just say we have power in this region more than people do in other regions because we are at choke point. And we kind of have a geographic responsibility to deal with the shipment of things and the testing of things, because if we stop it, they really have a hard time replacing this infrastructure, these facilities. It's not as easy as snapping your fingers. They really need to do that. So we do have a certain power, just like the GI resistance movement had a certain power.
Thanks.
And thank you again. Appreciate it.
Well, I'll tell you a story, my friend, from the Vietnam days way back when. Body counts mountain on the wall. You had to do something about it all. That's when the singer took a trip up to Washington State. It was a good day to travel on the interstate. 2 hitchhikers, all in 19, traveling real light with their heads shaved clean. The singer picked him up, he had room in the car. He says, I'll take you where you're going if it's not too far. We're going up to Canada, they said it kind of slow. Seems like the place to go. Now you can trust a stranger if you give him a chance, and there's a million stories in a sideways glance. The singer knew he had a long-range view. I'm only going to Seattle, he said, but I'll see what I can do. Now the interstate's a long, straight, blacktop line. You can do a lot of thinking while the time unwinds. Leaving California for the evergreen land. Pretty soon the singer had a plan. Stopping for supplies like anybody might do. Get a map and a compass and a flashlight too. Canteens for water, food enough to last. Going on to Seattle, but the drive right past. Almost to the border, take the side road to the hill. Here's your map and your compass and a $20 bill. Canada's that way, it's a straight shot. Good luck and goodbye, and don't get caught. And then the singer drove away in a darkening breeze, and 2 shadows disappeared in the evergreen trees. And that's a measure of a war. Try to tip the balance just a little bit more. I was there when the singer came in late, muttering something about the interstate. The songs were good and the music was fine, and that's what kept us going most of the time. And that's the end of my story, my friend, from the Vietnam days way back when, about a singer on the road and the AWOL kid, how you had to do something, and that's what they did.